The Sumerians were a population whose origins were from India, Persia, and the area around the Caspian Sea, and relationship to any other ethnic group are yet to be determined. The Sumerians soon dominated and eclipsed their Semitic-speaking neighbors. They introduced improved and new techniques that led to continued population growth and urbanization, resulting in the emergence of a modern civilization. They called themselves the Black-Headed People, spoke a monosyllabic language unrelated to any other language group. The Sumerians lived in Mesopotamia, which at the time was divided into city-states, each of which was ruled by a king and had its own religious beliefs.
In ancient Greek, Mesopotamia means the land between the rivers Tigris and Euphrates, and what today is the Persian Gulf. This region was divided between the Sumer and the Akkad state, with Sibar, Borsippa, and Kish in the north, and Ur, Uruk, and Eridu in the south, forming endpoints that helped to create a complex network of cities and canals. They are thought to be one of the oldest civilizations in the world. In fact, their culture, which was born between the 5500 and 5000 before Common Era, expanded from the very center of Mesopotamia to the rest of the region. The development of trade led to important agricultural settlements which were established in the area. Indeed, as time went by, the interaction between establishments became more frequent, resulting successfully in technological and social advancements that helped the development of city-states. During the Ubaid period, Sumerian city-states were divided due to ruralization, specialized institutions of production and consumption, which created distinctions between the Akkad and the Sumer, as it was the political partition of the time. This led to the beginning of the development of trade.
The Uruk period extended across Mesopotamia and became the most influential, creating the first city-states that were developed. In the 3500 before Common Era, the creation of the road facilitated trade. The fact that the Sumer were living between the two rivers and had a very fertile land led to a good flourishment of agricultural trade and had installed a great system of irrigation. Aside from local trade and long distance, their most important commercial partners were distributed along Mesopotamia and some parts of southeastern Asia, coasting through the Oman Gulf with the island of Dilmun, the present Bahrain, which held a monopoly on the copper trade, and coasting with the Arabian Sea, where there was the Oman and the Indus Valley, the today Pakistan and northern India. In the other part of Mesopotamia, the merchants also undertook months of long journeys to Anatolia, the present Turkey, coasting part of the Mediterranean Sea and through the Canaan, Lebanon, as we can see in the image 21. The Sumerians were particularly fond of lapis lazuli, a type of rock with a high price value, where there was evidence that the Sumerians may have roamed far to Afghanistan in order to get it. Over the times, Sumerians developed great technological changes which contributed to making establishment more complex, becoming the first ones in history to start trading networks by land and sea. With the fundamental inventions of the wheel, it facilitated the movement of goods and through the use of canals helped to irrigate the fields more efficiently and facilitate the transport of goods by sea, allowing them to expand agriculture along the rivers. In order to maintain a strong spirit of cooperation among the individual and the communities for their need of dependence, it was imprescindible the common effort and organization, such as keeping the constant repair of the canals, respecting the equitable division that made an increase of power of the governmental institutions and the rise of the Sumerian state.
At the beginning of the 3rd century before Common Era, they began to keep economic historical chronologies and royal genealogy records associated with kings and high officials. These practices evolved into the first written language, and their works influenced ancient Greece, ancient Rome, and sections of the Bible. Regarding war, conflicts between different establishments always existed. Although during the 3100 before Common Era major conflicts started to appear, Mesopotamia was dominated by the Sumerian and Akkadians. The Sumer state was divided in city-states by canals and boundary stones with different independent ruling.
War and trade were an enormous part of daily life in ancient Mesopotamia. In the early dynasty period, all those advantages developed, and therefore the rise of kings, establishing governments and bureaucracy, emerged conflicts between the Sumerian city-state for land and water rights.
For certain periods in time, the Sumerians were under one single rule, like in the case of Embaragesi of Kish, who was head of the Sumer against Elam during the first war ever recorded in history, circa 2700 before Common Era.
The Sumerians were triumphant and sacked the conquered city, despite the fact King Enadum was later conquered part of Elam. The kings that came after never took full control of the city-state. Treaties between Lagash and Umma inscribed on the Stele of Vultures, an old inscription in the Sumerian language that explains the conflict between the neighboring city-state of Lagash and Umma and the victory of Enadum, king of Lagash, were found in the 2500 before Common Era. This period turned into a sort of civil war between the Lagash and Umma for the dispute of the fertile land. Finally, it led to what may be the world's first peace treaty and one of the oldest legal documents, the Treaty of Meselim, signed around the 2550 before Common Era. Also, thanks to the economic and administrative documents, the Sumerian king list was discovered, which has a record of all the kings' names, Sumerian dynasty, and the duration of their reigns. The list gave a clear insight of the Sumerian political and war history based on a high kinship relation.
The written evidence is the prime source for the political history of Sumer. Sargon of Akkad was the king of the Kish kingdom of Akkad, known as Akkadians. Inside the Akkadian period, we find the pre-Akkadian period where the Lugal-Zagesi was ruled by the king of Uruk, and the Ur-Zababa was ruled by the king of Kish. Therefore, with the Akkadian dynasty, Sargon I was the one in power. During the early dynastic period, 2900 to 2334 before the Common Era, Akkadians began to live in city-states. Each of them had its own ruler and god or goddess, where the Sumerian language was very important. During this period, there had been several wars between the city-states, where Sumer were conquered by the king of Sargon of Akkad, and since then, the Akkadian Empire in 2300 before the Common Era started. The beginning of decadence of the Akkadian Empire came with the Gutian period, where there had been invasions from the Gutians, who ruled until the Ur period, also known as the Sumerian Renaissance, with the rebirth of the Sumerian culture.
Gradually, starting from the mid-2nd century before Common Era, political power began to shift between the major cities. When the king of Kish, Ur-Zababa, was conquered in the battle by Lugal-Zagesi of Uruk, Sargon moved to the city of Akkad. Then he defeated Lugal-Zagesi and brought him in chains to Nippur. Sargon began to extend his control all over the city-states in Mesopotamia, which had the necessity to unite the ethno-linguistic groups. Sargon conquered all those cities, taking over civilizations of the river valleys and setting up a unified empire. Under the Akkadian rule, the ruler started to be seen as a god, and society became even more centralized around the character of the ruler. There was the common belief that every civilization and their kings believed in expansionism, because it had been ordered by the gods. Sargon had to take control over the waterways down to the Persian Gulf. He inaugurated the Akkadian Empire, calling himself the King of Lands and King of the Four Quarters. His empire lasted 200 years. Due to expansionism, the change of products and services became more frequent since the city-states were more connected between each other. In conclusion, we believe that the creation of a very complex and sophisticated interconnected society, and afterwards with the Akkadian conquest, Sumerians led to the first international system, and also due to the development in trade, politics, and warfare. We conclude that the international relation began with the emergence of Sumerian city-states and not in 1648 with the Westphalian Treaty.